I want to introduce you to our speaker here this afternoon. It is Dr. Joe Ikely from NDSU, North Dakota State University, out of Fargo. Joe has been an assistant professor and extension weed specialist for North Dakota State University since 2019. He has a statewide extension responsibility for all crops except potato and sugar beet. Management of herbicide-resistant and other problematic weeds are a primary focus of his extension programming. His research program focuses on managing difficult-to-control and herbicide-resistant weeds in corn, soybean, and dry edible beans. NDSU also won their 10th FCS football championship last Monday, so he's still got the euphoria of that. We used to win football championships here in Saskatchewan. Don't want to bring that up. Okay, let's give a big round of applause to Dr. Joe Ikely.
Thank you. Well, thank you for that introduction. Just going to check on the mic on picking me up okay online and everything. Perfect. All right, well, thank you for everyone for being here. Thank you everyone online for being here as well. Doing most of my research down in Fargo. Most days I'm living and breathing water hemp, but Kochia knows no bounds, so it's starting to reinvade the Fargo area. But just like many people in this room, Kochia by far is our statewide #1 problem. And going to kind of share a lot of what we've learned, particularly in recent years, as we're trying to deal with this weed. So here's what this is from the Minot Research Station, so drive about 6 hours southeast of here, and that's what we get to deal with at that particular research station. One thing we didn't mention is some of the other economic costs of Kochia. So we have a product weed guide that we put out every year. We name it Weed of the Year. This is from the fall of 2021, severe drought that year. This is from Mandan, North Dakota. And this is actually where our FMC technical rep, the neighborhood he lived in, he told me this resident was told just drag those out to the street corner. We'll come and pick them up in a couple days. Well, they rolled away again. So always fun to show a picture of just reminding everyone that it is a tumbleweed, and occasionally you might be the poor loser on the block that gets all of your Kochia, or we might get a whole neighborhood. And interesting, now we've decided the video flip back, so everyone, if we can turn our heads to the left for this video. Oh, now we're back to the normal way. So a couple of falls ago in Great Falls, Montana, which I believe is southwest of here if I'm oriented correctly, and this is honestly probably a mix of Russian thistle and Kochia, but anytime a weed makes the national news in the US, I'm going to isolate that video clip and use it in a presentation. So we're going to go probably another 5 houses in this video clip and just show when we have a bad year, we can tell when we have a bad control year in the fields in the neighborhood. All right, that's enough of that. We got some actual stuff to get to. So a couple disclaimers. One I forgot to mention at the beginning. So I am one of about 13 weed scientists at NDSU. We're spread across the state. And so the whole team is kind of involved in this presentation. So the other disclaimer, there's going to be a lot of U.S. product names on these slides. As always, feel free to take pictures or screenshots if you want to reference them and look up what the product name is here. Where I kind of know and tried to, I put in the Canadian name, and I'm going to talk in active ingredients. So there's going to be a mix of words on the slide and coming out of my mouth. But a lot of these are just taken from some of my colleagues, and we try to talk in U.S. trade names to most audiences. So with that set up now, historically how have we controlled Kochia? And this is really a focus on the pre-plant or the pre-seed burn down application. So going back through history, I mean, glyphosate has always been one of our best tools in this weed, and we've kind of lost that over the last decade. Now my base starting point is that's not going to work on population for us. Many of these group 2 herbicides we've used in small grains forever, but one of the best stories about Glean, which is chlorsulfuron, is a weed scientist at NDSU got his master's degree on chlorsulfuron, was the best product ever. 18 months after he did his research, didn't even work. So that's how quickly we got resistance to some of our group 2 herbicides. Group 4, 2,4-D, dicamba, and styrene, at least for us in North Dakota, 2,4-D has not been the most effective tool for probably 30 plus years. It was once very effective on Kochia, but we basically have tolerance built into all of our populations. Dicamba, and then styrene is fluroxapyr. That's the U.S. trade name for that one. So I know plenty of resistance to these three herbicides up around here. And then over the last 20 or so years, a lot of reliance on the group 14 herbicides, particularly ahead of broadleaf crops. Very effective chemistry, and I am going to talk quite a bit about group 14s because of some of the new resistances that we have. So 2020, this is kind of what we were looking at with some of our worst populations that we knew within the state of North Dakota, and probably Kochia knows no bounds, so I'm sure the same thing up here. So 2020, we still had plenty of utility of those group 14 herbicides, but if you had the worst case scenario, group 9, group 2, and group 4 resistance. I know for us, the starting point is group 9 and group 2 resistance. We have a little bit grayer picture with particularly dicamba and fluroxapyr resistance. We have it, but it's not very widespread for us yet. Every weed scientist has a picture like this in their slide deck. So glyphosate resistance first found down in Kansas, and one of the easiest ways to find resistant kochia when it's beginning is you spray a certain herbicide, and just again showing that tumbleweed dispersal mechanism, and you can kind of track where an individual plant rolled across the landscape. So that's a picture from a colleague of mine down in Kansas. The first, I believe this was the first case of glyphosate resistance found in kochia down there. Group 14 resistance. We're going to spend at least the first half of the presentation discussing this, because I want to make sure everyone knows exactly what we're seeing when we talk about group 14 resistant kochia. So I know there's 2 known cases up here in the prairies, one in Saskatchewan, one in Alberta. I don't know the town name, so that's as close as I can get. The first case was found in 2021. Dr. Charles Geddes has led basically the whole effort on this. Now, I shouldn't say the whole effort. He's been leading, driving the effort with a lot of help along the way. 2022 is where we found our first cases. Right here in Minot on the research station actually is one of the first ones we found, and about 4 other counties in the western part of North Dakota. Since then, we have worked with BASF. They've got a good group in Germany that knows group 14 herbicides and how they work in the plant. And so they've actually found the mutation, and we have developed a test for a rapid assay for resistance. I know Dr. Geddes is working on one here as well. Hopefully he gets that going soon, because very difficult to send samples across the international border. So about a year ago, standing here, I would have shown you maybe 10 counties highlighted. This map is already outdated. This is from September. The green counties are where we have simply confirmed at least one population. I might ask, what are some of these white counties? Honestly, we probably just haven't gotten samples from those counties. Pretty interesting, alarming is probably the better word. Usually when we track resistance within a weed, we'll find one population or a couple, and then we find populations kind of radiating out from there. Maybe a local geography thing at first. This went from basically first detection for us about 4 counties, for Dr. Geddes about 1 population. And now it's basically every corner of our state. No official confirmations yet, but we get plenty of phone calls from South Dakota, south of us, and plenty of folks dealing with the same types of issues down there. I guess I wanted to point out for reference, from the northwest corner, 3 counties over, that's about the Manitoba, Saskatchewan line. So for those online, there's kind of a skinny county there. I'm going to reference that county a little bit later when I talk about some populations. So I was always told when given a talk to tell a story, so I thought it'd be best to bring you along our journey and the story of how we discovered this and what does and does not work with this particular resistance. So these first fields we were called out for failures of different group 14 herbicides. AIM or carfentrazone, we had some issues. And then saflufenicil, we call it sharpen. I'm pretty sure it's heat up here. Some issues with that product as well. And so that first winter, we basically looked at a 1 and a 2x rate. I believe for AIM carfentrazone, the rate 1x rate is about the same, no matter which side of the border we're at. But essentially, the far left column, susceptible population, and then 4 different townships where we collected seed from, and this product was not touching those plants at either rate. Saflufenicil, basically the same thing, maybe a little bit more of a leaf burn on the kochia plants compared to carfentrazone, but still every plant rapidly regrew from that treatment. So 1 and a 2x rate, weren't getting any control. Then when we start investigating resistance, we want to know, is it a high level resistance? Can we spray our way out of this? It's nothing I ever recommend, but it's a question that pops up. Can we just raise that rate? This is one of the first resistant populations we found, and we went up to a 16x rate, so that's basically a pint per acre of AIM or carfentrazone, and again, basically no symptomology. That susceptible population is up front. Can we go higher? This is saflufenicil. This was some of the testing that we went in to officially confirm resistance. The top two populations, those are resistant populations. The bottom two are susceptible. This one, that's our 1x rate. So that's about 1 fluid ounce per acre of saflufenicil. Might be a half X rate here, but very similar ballpark. 10x rate, plenty of survivors. What about 100x, our saflufenicil rate? Still had survivors. So I always tell our groups and our growers, think of how much you spend per acre for the 1x rate of something like saflufenicil. Spend 100 times that, you're still going to have Kochia escape. So we knew we were dealing with pretty high level resistance. Usually it means target site. Won't get really in depth into that, but it is indeed target site resistance. And that's what's helped us develop this leaf assay test, because it's just a simple mutation, and we can find that easily using DNA within the lab. So I showed you carfentrazone, I showed you saflufenicil, I'm showing you Monty Python, because I always liked this skit. But a couple group 14 herbicides. What about some others? This is Flexstar. We use that in soybean reflex, fomestifen. Completely controlled this resistant population. So again, there's carfentrazone in the back. This was actually very surprising to us because within broadleaf weeds with group 14 resistance, the pigweeds, water hemp, and Palmer amaranth are drivers in the U.S., and we find group 14 resistant water hemp by reflex or fomestifen failing in the field. Other herbicides in that chemical family. Now all of a sudden it is actually controlling these populations. So then we kind of expanded the investigation, and keep in mind we were doing this at the same time that Dr. Geddes was doing the same set of work up here. So if anyone's really into chemistry, here's all your group 14 herbicides and their structures. I know there's some pop quizzes. You won't be quizzed on chemical structures. You already got your lunch, so you know you're fed already. But essentially what I want to point out is fomestifen reflex is in this blue box, and that's our diphenyl ether herbicides. In the U.S., we use aciflurofin, Blazer. I think that's the same trade name across borders. And then lactofen, another one we use in soybean. I'm going to point that out because these are still effective. These other chemical families, we're not finding much in the way of control on these Kochia populations. So we wanted to look foliar applications. How do these different group 14 products work? Rate, I apologize, I'm going to bounce all over you. This is grams per hectare, so we're going all over the board with rates and everything. But active ingredient is on the left column, U.S. trade name there on the second from the right, and then chemical family for those who really like to dig into things. Essentially a 1x use rate, and that's going to be more or less the same across borders. What did we find? Again, this is U.S. trade names, but on the next slide I'll kind of go through in a little bit more detail. A susceptible population, if we sprayed a group 14 herbicide on Kochia, we killed them all. That's good for research. We want to make sure it's good you have this population in your field too. No one wants Kochia, but if you can spray anything and kill it, that's the best case scenario. One of the resistant populations, and I should say from a foliar standpoint, every population has acted exactly the same. So from a foliar standpoint, this is basically written in stone. This gold bar is our first replicate, and this is just 4 different replicates in the greenhouse. Bottom left corner is no herbicide. The next 3 are these diphenyl ether herbicides. This one I have the green laser, kind of the middle of those dead plants. That's the fomestifen or reflex. The back row, sharpen, that's saflufenicil or heat. Reviton is tiafenicil. Vita is ET, pyriflufen, and then AIM or carfentrazone. All basically a little bit of leaf burn, but then rapid regrowth out of those chemistries. And then we often talk about, so Spartan, that's Authority, or sulfentrazone, and then Valor is Volterra, I think up here, flumioxazin. We always talk about these from a residual standpoint, but interestingly enough, they actually have more foliar activity than what we typically think of as foliar active or burn down herbicides from group 14s. Not going to get control, but we did cause some suppression. So as we start maybe thinking about tank mixing different things together, we are getting some suppression foliar out of those two active ingredients. So if you want some data, I always feel obligated to at least show some data during a talk. So here's essentially those same herbicides, left to right, and then controls on our y-axis. So the diphenyl ethers, complete control of these populations. Sulfentrazone, interestingly enough, in this minot population, about 95% control. It did eventually kind of regrow some more, but out of the herbicides that had the most effectiveness from a foliar standpoint, sulfentrazone was the one. And then for all practical standpoints, everything to the right, that's going to be a commercial failure in the field. But if you want some numbers, basically the pyriflufen and carfentrazone were the worst of these, with the other three herbicides previously mentioned kind of falling in between there somewhere. So what does this kind of all mean from a burn down standpoint or pre-plant, pre-seed timing? So again, this is going to be a lot of U.S. trade names, a mix here. This is kind of an exercise we go through with our growers. So looking at least what we call the minor crops. I probably shouldn't be saying canola is a minor crop up here, but it basically is for us as we categorize things in the U.S. But out of these, so here's prior to group 14 and group 9 resistance, here's kind of what we were working with in the U.S. for these different crops from that burn down standpoint. Take away glyphosate and then take away our group 14 herbicides, and there's what's left. And so this is probably the most dire part of this group 14 resistance, is the fact that we lose most of our labeled stuff ahead of some of these different crops up on the screen. What's one thing that's left? A product, unfortunately, you guys don't have. So paraquat or gramoxone is still one of the best herbicides that we have, and unfortunately, you guys just don't have access to that one. We have looked, and I'll show a little bit of data on diquat, not quite as good as paraquat, but you can get some pretty decent suppression out of that one as well. So again, as we start kind of trying to tank mix things together. At least what we call the major crops, small grains, soybean, and corn, a lot more options. You take away your glyphosate in group 14. We still have some options. Small grains, really a pretty heavy reliance on dicamba from that pre-plant standpoint. Corn, I'm not really worried about. Pre-plant and in crop, plenty of options. Soybean, we have a few issues for those who grow soybean. But small grains, not many pre-plant options, but I will discuss and show some data on the in-crop options. So small grains, still a lot of effective options for us, even on these group 14 resistance. And then dicamba resistance, we have some further issues when we have that along as well. So burn down options. So here's just one data slide from Brian Jenks. Again, he's based in Minot, looking at what we can apply ahead of several different crops. So kind of going through what's left that we think we might be able to use. In this case, glyphosate, Spartan Charge, that's a pre-mixture of sulfentrazone and carfentrazone. So I don't know if there's a trade name up here, but I see some FMC heads nodding. So this was kind of a standard for us for many years, but then glyphosate resistance, we relied a lot on the Spartan Charge product, and it hasn't worked quite as effective for us with these resistant populations. Liberty glufosinate, we don't really like recommending this from a pre-plant standpoint. Works better with heat and humidity. We like to save it for in-crop, for the crops that we can use it, because of just some of those crops have fewer options left. But we looked at that. This is the canola rate for us, so a little bit light if you're growing soybeans. Regulone, that's diquat for us. Then the paraquat is right below that. And then not really going to discuss these bottom two. These are really haloxafen methyl, pre-plant product, and then a tank mix that's available for us in crop and small grains. But if you're interested in lamb's quarters and yellow foxtail, there's some data on the right side. But essentially making an application of May 30th, and then here's Kochia on June 6th and then June 20th. Glufosinate, we had a hot, warm May when these trials were put out. I can bet we could put this out 100 more times and never hit 99% control out of glufosinate in a pre-seed application again. But if you're living right, it can happen. Again, we don't recommend it because of the environmental nature with that product. I mentioned paraquat for us is kind of the best product we have in this situation. Diquat, a typical use rate, 80% control. We would like to see higher, but we didn't have more complex tank mixtures in this trial. That's going out this upcoming spring. But it's certainly a good starting point for maybe to mix in some of these other things. You know, what does diquat and sulfentrazone look like from a foliar standpoint? that's some of the things that we need to investigate, because I think there might be something there for us. So that's what group 14 resistance kind of looks like from that burn down, the foliar standpoint. What about residual herbicides? Are we seeing any difference in these populations out of residual from sulfentrazone or flumioxazin? So a lot of the data I'll be showing here are from a greenhouse trial, and again, just comparing these populations. So in the greenhouse, we can kind of add enough moisture that we need, and then really compare these populations. But essentially, we looked at sulfentrazone at 2 rates. This 140 grams, that's 4 fluid ounces per acre, or 118 mils per acre. So I think that's the higher end of what's labeled up here. This is basically what we're applying in general for most of our crops. Looked at a 2x rate of that as well. And then flumioxazin, I think this is a 1x rate no matter where you live, and then twice that as well. Looking at, again, comparing different populations. Susceptible population. Gold box is once again our first replicate. SP4, that stands for Spartan 4. That's that 4 fluid ounces of authority. And then double that. V3 is that 1x rate of flumioxazin or Volterra. And then V6 is double that. So susceptible population from a residual standpoint, everything worked again. Would be nice if all Kochia populations were like that. Here's our worst one. And then I'll show comparisons of different populations. A population near Mandam we collected. The first replicate, we basically had Kochia growing through all treatments, including those 2x rates, in this case on a sandy loam. Did get more suppression and control in some of the other replicates in this particular population out of sulfentrazone, but flumioxazin basically looks pretty similar to the non-treated check in most cases. Showing some numbers, again, just to show some data. The far left and far right columns are the susceptible populations that we utilized. This is all that 2x rate of flumioxazin, so it's something we're not going to be applying in the field. And then here are 5 different populations in between, showing that we were getting between 17 and about 70% control out of a 2x rate of flumioxazin. The 1x rate, even lower control. So pretty concerning situation there. Sulfentrazone, a little bit better, but we're about 30 to 70%. So across populations, still having some issues with some of these residual herbicides. Here's just a picture of 7 different populations. So in the back now we've got Valor, that's Volterra, flumioxazin, 3 replicates. Spartan, authority or sulfentrazone, again 3 replicates, and then non-treated up front. Our susceptible is the far right there. So in this case, showing complete control from sulfentrazone, maybe 1 escape from flumioxazin. What I'm going to point out, when I showed the map of North Dakota, I said look at that kind of skinny county right below the border of Manitoba and Saskatchewan. Mohall is a town in that county. We have 2 different populations from there. 5, so columns 5 and 6. And I just point those 2 out, very close geographically. I'm basically collected from the same township. Foliar response was exactly the same. Every picture I showed you earlier, response was the same. Different response to sulfentrazone though. So in this case, this population 6 from Mohall basically was escaping sulfentrazone. This was a 1x rate, I should point out again. So this is that 4 fluid ounce or per acre rate. Same population, different part of the township. Couple starting to escape, but much better control of sulfentrazone. So where we're at now with knowledge about this is we know that the foliar herbicides are going to respond about the same. Seems like flumioxazin responds about the same across populations. Likely due to some differences in individual mutations, we are seeing a bit of a range in responses to sulfentrazone. So there might be a case you have group 14 herbicides and still get some pretty decent residual out of sulfentrazone. Might be a case where you don't get a whole lot. And we're still trying to figure out why that is. But again, just showing what this might look like from a residual standpoint. That's standalone products. We don't often recommend a standalone product. Not good for resistance, not good for a number of different reasons. So what about a few other products we can think about from a residual standpoint? So again, just to make sure everyone's awake, I keep flip-flopping everything, X and Y axis, left and right, top and bottom across the screen. This set of pictures, a susceptible population is on the top and on the bottom, 2 resistant populations in the middle. Again, Valor, that's flumioxazin or Volterra. Zidua is pyroxasulfone, it's got the same trade name across borders. And then Fierce is the combination of those two. So, again, flumioxazin, we're just not seeing much activity out of that herbicide on these populations. Pyroxasulfone, a little bit different story. I still have plenty of escapes, but overall, better control. And then Fierce, that combination, we're seeing much better control. Yes, there's still a couple escapes, but if we're looking at these products and can get 90% control, that's certainly better than what some of the alternatives might be. So, even though we're not getting a whole lot of activity out of flumioxazin, pyroxasulfone, we're getting some, the combination together is actually working better. So it's not that flumioxazin is doing absolutely nothing. It's certainly helping out in the case when we look at some of these tank mixes. So I'm a weed scientist. I got to be dire for a little bit. So let's go. What does work? You're probably wondering that. You were probably wondering that 20 minutes ago. This is an overgeneralization, and we are going to point out some specific examples along the way. The photosystem inhibitors are still very effective on these populations. So that's our group 5 and our group 6 chemistry. I did pass one cornfield right when I crossed the border, but that's things like atrazine, bromoxynil, and pyridate. Soybean, small grains, a few different options. Pyridate, I'll show some pulse crop data for that as well. Again, diquat is a group 22, so it does work, just it's not going to be a standalone product. The group 27 products, we are flush with those in corn. Small grains, we have plenty of options there as well. Glufosinate, still very effective. I've got a little question mark next to our group 3 herbicides. Based on where we're at within North Dakota, some folks prefer trifluralin, some ethylfluralin. For us, that's Treflan and Sonlan. I don't know if those cross the border. We can get some suppression out of those, but we often have to incorporate those. For best activity, incorporate the liquid in the spring. We have the dry granules available for fall applications and no-till, but those have never been quite the best products for us, relying on that snowfall and snowmelt. Pyroxasulfone, I'll dig into some more data on that active ingredient. And not a whole lot around here, I'm guessing, not a whole lot in the western part of North Dakota, but if you want to get some cold hard steel going, we can still control kochia with tillage. So I know there's a lot of people online. Good news, we haven't run a plow through kochia and had it bounce us out of the field yet. Dr. Charles Geddes put this together, so all credit to him, but he kind of put together a chart. If you have group 2, group 4, group 9, and group 14 resistant kochia, what's labeled in the prairie provinces? So from a soil applied standpoint, ethylfluralin, trifluralin, plus metribuzin, pyroxasulfone, different crops on the top here, where there's a green C, that's control, and then the yellow S is suppression. Foliar applied pre-plant, bromoxynil. I know that there's this tank mix of bromoxynil to a pramazone. I believe it's called Certitude. We're trying to get that in the U.S. because we're out of options ahead of canola, specifically if you don't want to use paraquat. So I know this is a pretty specific label, but it works very well in the field. We've looked at it for now about 2 or 3 years out in the field. Then in crop, we've got a bromoxynil, glufosinate, and then some of our group 27s and our tank mixes of bromoxynil and group 27s and small grains. So still some options out there, and that's basically the list. And again, this is a worst case. If you have group 2, 4, 9, and 14 resistance, we have some populations like this. Not many populations are all 4. So this is where it really does become kind of knowing the populations you're working with, because this is a worst case. Many populations we might have more options available based on the exact resistance profile. I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about fall applications for residual. So we've been doing this for over a decade now down in North Dakota, particularly in no-till, where we don't have that option of tillage in the spring. This is a picture from, he was working for Valent at the time. This is the best case scenario that we have seen of, in this case, a fall application of flumioxazin at 4 ounces per acre, plus some metribuzin, and then 2,4-D, that was for other weeds in the fall, nothing residual on kochia. It was applied on the left side of the screen, the right side, where you see all that extra green, that's all kochia, clean on the left side. That's about the best case scenario. We don't often see control into early June looking like that. But showing that this is one of the reasons why we went into fall applications. If we get these products on the fall before the ground freezes, get some snowfall, get some snow melt, some of those spring rains, we have that active ingredient, the herbicide, right where we want it in the soil profile, right as kochia starts germinating, right when it gets above freezing in the spring. So this has been a very effective method of getting our residual herbicides utilized, certainly for us in North Dakota. How about a comparison of different herbicides? So here's, again, some more data from Brian Jenks, applied in mid-October of 2022. Blue bar are ratings on kochia, May 23rd. The orange bar is June 6th. Again, walking through products, Fierce, that's that combination of flumioxazin and pyroxasulfone. Valor is Volterra, flumioxazin plus metribuzin. The far right is a third of a pound per acre of metribuzin by itself. And then kind of here in the middle, sulfentrazone and sulfentrazone plus metribuzin. This was in Minot. This is on one of these group 14 resistant populations. I want to point out that caveat. And so if we kind of start there, thinking about sulfentrazone, we haven't often recommended this one in the fall. We prefer this product in the spring because it is more water soluble than something like flumioxazin. That's why historically we've put flumioxazin on in the fall, less water soluble. We need that moisture from the snow melt. Compared to sulfentrazone, we can usually hook a spring rain and get that incorporated into the soil. But again, just comparing products, there's sulfentrazone, flumioxazin, about that 50 to 65% control. So even though it's a resistant population, there's going to be susceptible individuals, and we're still going to get some benefit. So when you think about that carpet of kochia that comes up in the spring, reducing that by 50% is going to be pretty good to get better coverage from our foliar applied herbicides. Some years this is as good as these products work anyways. Some years we get much higher, but this particular 2022 into 23, those are the standalones. Getting into some of these combinations, so the Fierce product about 70%, flumioxazin and metribuzin closer to 90, 80 to 90, depending on the rating date, and then sulfentrazone and metribuzin, or that rate of metribuzin by itself, near 90%. Metribuzin is a photosystem inhibitor, so it is still one of our most effective herbicides. And even though we have typically applied that in the spring, getting a lot more questions about fall applications, and we're going to have a lot more data you'll probably see if you ever observe what we're doing down south on that particular product in the spring from a fall application. Anthem Flex, same trade name across borders. So this is, again, this is pyroxasulfone. It's kind of the driver active ingredient here. So here's a fall application of 3, 4, and then 6 fluid ounces per acre of this product. I think the formulation is the same across borders. And then here's kind of a middle rate, 3.5 ounces plus metribuzin. Again, if you're into foxtail, yellow bars, or green foxtail control, kochia is why we're here. So these were applied fall of 23, middle of October, evaluations in late June. So really testing how far this residual can go. That lower rate's about 50%. If we go up to this higher rate, up to 90% control. So this is, again, primarily pyroxasulfone fall applied. Pyroxasulfone, not the most water-soluble product, so one of these ones we're really evaluating for capturing that snowfall and snowmelt to get better control. Not really going to, just want to mention this, not going to show any data, but we're actually looking a lot at pyroxasulfone in the fall for wild oat control, because in the spring we don't get a whole lot of utility out of pyroxasulfone for wild oat, but in the fall we can get 80 to 90+% control. So we're looking a lot more just at that active ingredient in general, and kochia will certainly be a focus moving forward. So that's kind of all I had for residual products. Wanted to point this one out just because it's what's old is new again. So this is Pyridate Tough. This was labeled in corn back in the early 90s, kind of went away for a while, and now Belgium has purchased this active ingredient and brought it back. The reason I bring it up is it has been inserted into the pulse crop market, so particularly chickpea and lentils. And so this is just a sales sheet from Belgium showing some data from Alberta, Prairie Ag Research. Metribuzin, Tough, at 2 different rates, so Pyridate, active ingredient, and then that pyridate plus metribuzin. So they were seeing pretty good control out of the high rate of pyridate and then that tank mix with metribuzin. Just 2 ounces per acre of a dry product of metribuzin. Pretty low rate, but again, this is post-emergence in lentils. So just wanted to set that stage because you probably may have seen that marketing sheet. I know it's been marketed pretty heavily in our geography. So out of our North Dakota Weed Control Guide, and if you're just interested, I'll have a link at the end if you want to check that guide out. Within chickpeas, we're basically at the 12 to 24 fluid ounce per acre rate of pyridate by itself. Really, we're recommending that high-end rate. If we want pyridate alone to control kochia, we have to be at that high rate. Lentil, there's a pretty wide range of rates, but often, again, they're marketing it with the tank mix with the metribuzin, and that's what we really are looking at to get in-crop control out of this product, so in foliar application in lentils. So that's kind of what's in the weed guide. Here's some summarized thoughts from Brian Jenks, and I know he had worked with Ed Davis out of Montana State. So again, quite a bit going on this slide here. How can we make this pyridate work in lentils? Here's just kind of the summary of some research. So there is going to be some crop injury. I know talking to our lentil growers, that's okay if we can control kochia. Everyone kind of just make your own assessment there. If you have kochia that's 1 to 2 inches or up to 5 centimeters tall, basically we're looking at that 12 or 10 fluid ounce rate of pyridate or tough, plus that 2 ounce per acre of a dry metribuzin. If kochia is a little bit larger, we need a higher rate of tough or pyridate. Got to get the right adjuvant system. Usually you want a crop oil with this product, but in lentils we're using a non-ionic surfactant because of the risk of injury. And again, there's going to be some severe injury. Usually does recover and don't often see that in the yield monitor. And then it's contact herbicide, so we want plenty of good coverage and a few other notes there at the bottom. All right, I did lie. There is one more residual data set I want to go through. So we're taking a closer look at metribuzin for a number of reasons within our state and really the whole U.S. Not just kochia, but this is still a very effective herbicide on pigweeds, even in the case where we have atrazine resistance. So if you look at anything from the U.S., we're talking a lot about metribuzin. Again, what's old is new again. And then we just know that sulfentrazone is popular. So we're looking at basically a 1 and a 2x rate is what this treatment structure is. We're looking at it in soybean, but I figured I'd show this because rates will vary, but this might be something we could utilize in field pea, for instance. So this is from this past year. I will say we had plenty of rainfall to incorporate these products. Might look a little bit different in a dry year. I'm going to show some data from Carrington. That's this gold star kind of on the right side of the screen for those online. We do have group 14 resistance confirmed in that county. And then Hettinger is the star in the southwest corner. Haven't confirmed group 14 resistance, and it's not on that research farm. You might be probably figured out why I pointed that specifically out before going to the data. Bottom of the screen is basically our products. It's the 1 and the 2x rate of metribuzin, 1 and 2x rate of sulfentrazone, and then the various combinations. The yellow or gold bars are Hettinger. Again, that's a group 14 susceptible population. And in Carrington is the green bar, which is the group 14 resistant population. In this case, 6 weeks after planting, no matter what crop you're in, we should have had a post-emergence herbicide on. But again, these trials, we really test how long this residual can be effective. Down in Hettinger, I'm going to start there because that's the good news. Basically, 1 and 2x rate was about 80% control of either product by itself. Different combinations, we can get up to complete control of kochia 6 weeks after planting. So really good news for us on that 1x rate because that's what most people are going to be applying. Some of us in the eastern part of the state might go with those 2x rates. Carrington, we did have that drop off on sulfentrazone because of resistance, but metribuzin is still very effective, and then these combinations, certainly not losing any efficacy there. So kochia, your driver weed, definitely we're looking a lot more at metribuzin, but also just think of other weeds that are out there in the field. That's always something we don't talk about often enough when you're kind of picking out your program. I've gone how long without really talking about small grains? Got to share some small grain data. And I know I'm getting pretty tight here on time, but I don't have too much left to go. So I mentioned kind of earlier, small grains, we still have plenty of options. The pre-plant burn down, pre-seed situation, limited there, but in crop, we have options. One thing I want to point out, and again, I know that mileage will vary up here compared to for us. We don't have a whole lot of confirmed resistance to fluroxapyr. But in general, we're getting about 70% control on Kochia out of fluroxapyr. So bringing it into the greenhouse, we control it, but in the field, it's almost guaranteed 70% control. So nothing really confirmed resistance, but it's not going to be a complete Kochia product. Some of these other ones are where we're getting a more effective active ingredients. I'm going to point out a few of those. So some of the premixes on the market, and again, these trade names will change. So Bucktrail, that's Promoxinil, I think that's partner up here, standalone product. Tolvera is on deck, I believe. You guys got a much better trade name out of this product than we did. So this is a newer one from Corteva. It's a Group 27 herbicide with Promoxinil. Husky, I believe, is the same across borders. That's Bayer's Group 27 plus Promoxinil. And then Talinor is Syngenta's Group 27 plus Promoxinil. So you probably figured out the theme of this slide. The orange bar on the far right of each column is Kochia. If you have water hemp, lamb's quarters, or ragweed, feel free to look at the data from those. But really just showing Promoxinil by itself, the max labeled rate, about 60% control. In this particular year, we were getting about 80% control across the board if we're just doing these Promoxinil plus Group 27 premixtures. So that's what we're seeing on Kochia. Our basic recommendation is we want that as a starting point in small grains, plus some fluroxapyr. And I think I left that data set out here, but we're seeing very good control out of those Promoxinil, Group 27, fluroxapyr, tank mixes or premixes. That's kind of the standard that we're recommending in small grains. Again, Tolvera, that's on deck up here. I'm going to talk to Corteva because I like on deck much better. I actually know what that means. But Group 27, Group 6, here's again some data from Brian Jenks. We've been able to look at this for a number of years now. For Kochia, definitely a range in control based on the height of Kochia. So nothing too surprising there, but we are getting complete control when Kochia is 2 inches, 5 centimeters or shorter. When we get up to 4 inches or 10 centimeters, still about 90% control. Anything larger than that, that's where we're hovering about 80% control. So even though we do have some of these effective options, again, with Kochia, we need to stay on top of it and make sure that we get that applied when it is as small as possible. I don't know if this product is coming to Canada. We're just going to get it hopefully this year, but 2026 may be more realistic for us. New Farm is bringing back Dichlorprop. It's an older herbicide that's been in basically premixtures and lawns for the last 50 years, but we found a few things about this product along the way, and it does actually have very good control of Kochia and dicamba and fluroxapyr-resistant Kochia. So they're bringing this product back. In small grains, we're getting it as a premix with Promoxinil. Do not know if this is a trade name, or if there is a trade name in Canada, but my guess is probably because of how effective we've kind of seen it can work. Number of years of data, again, a slide from Brian Jenks, Kochia size in inches, and then basically the range of control. So if we have that small Kochia, we can get, again, this 99, 97% control. If you want complete Kochia control, gonna need a little bit extra, probably. But again, right size, and we can get very good control. If you're just interested in what either active ingredient brings by itself, not as good as that combination. So just in case that product's coming up here, I wanted to highlight it because we've been seeing some good data out of it. I went a long time without really talking about glufosinate. So basically our Kochia option in canola. And so this could be a whole nother hour presentation. So just a couple highlights with glufosinate. It's still very effective, but it can be a bit of a finicky product. So application parameters, we basically want the right droplet size. We want the right adjuvant system, including ammonium sulfate. This is simply some research when I was down in Indiana on Palmer amaranth in this case, but we can swap Kochia in for the same message. A good application that's the right droplet size, right adjuvant system, right carrier volume, pretty good control. If we get the droplet size is too large, carrier volume is not high enough, forget to put AMS in the tank, we can get some pretty poor control. So we do want to make sure we're doing everything right with glufosinate to steward that product and make sure it is still effective for us. Again, this could be a whole nother talk, but Delta T, I know there's been some discussion up here about this, started in Australia. We're discussing it a lot with our growers in North Dakota. And the real quick boiled down version is that it's basically a combination of our temperatures and humidity, and really looking at this particularly for glufosinate, because this is a product that works better in higher humidity environments in general. And basically with Delta T, we have seen some of our farmers are really tracking Delta T, and when it's anywhere in this green spot, that's kind of the sweet spot for making a herbicide application, they are reporting better kochia control than when we have either a very dry environment. We're typically not spraying when dry environment is the bottom right corner. Certainly we're getting better control in that sweet spot than when we have a too hot or too dry of an environment. So again, that's a whole nother hour discussion, but want to bring that up in case anyone is mentioning Delta T. A new research paper came out like 2 days ago, and it's low resolution pictures of the figures, so I didn't get a whole lot out of this, but for anyone who likes to go online and read scientific papers, there's a new one. It's a meta-analysis of weather and glufosinate efficacy. A whole lot of my colleagues, Peter Sycamore, some data out of Guelph. And I just highlighted what I think is one of the main take-homes from this paper. Again, this is glufosinate applications essentially across 30 years from all these different locations. Low rainfall over the 5 days prior to glufosinate application was detrimental to the probability of successful control of, in this case, that's water hemp and foxtail. So only 3 species analyzed, but I think this is very applicable to many species that we're dealing with. So low rainfall over the 5 days prior to glufosinate was detrimental to the probability of successful control. Lower relative humidity, so less than 70%, and lower solar radiation, the day of application will reduce the probability of successful weed control in most cases. And then the probability of successful control decreased for all species when the average air temperature over the first 5 days after application was less than or equal to 25 C. So it's something we've kind of known, discussed about glufosinate. We like heat, humidity, and sunlight, but there is real data behind this, looking at hundreds of trials. I know this paper started with over 1 million data points, and we refined from there, so a lot of data behind those statements. But again, just pointing out, we kind of need some good application parameters when we're dealing with glufosinate and kochia. Just trying to kind of tie things together about what we discussed here today. So with resistance, it's definitely not getting easier. I don't think we're in a no-win situation quite yet with kochia. Certainly we face that with water hemp and some of our crops in North Dakota, but we don't want to get into a no-win situation with some crops where we just don't have the herbicide options available. Have yet to find a population resistant to everything. Weed scientists, we certainly are some gloom and doom crowds, but it's kind of the rare case where we have 4 different sites of action resistance and nothing resistant to everything yet. Again, this could have been a whole nother talk, but really just whatever you're applying, optimizing the applications. We want to tank mix effective ingredients, use the correct adjuvants. That's a whole nother hour talk. Delta T is an hour talk, glufosinate is an hour talk. So really just boiling down, making sure we're making the best applications we can. Non-chemical methods is another talk we could do. So fall seeded, in this case like winter wheat or winter rye, very good crops for kochia control. Very competitive, and it's going to basically on its own suppress that first couple of flushes of kochia in the spring. Perennial crops also very good for kochia control. So if we have the ground covered, kochia is not going to succeed. Electrocution, some interest in that. We've kind of tracked some of these zapping devices across some fields. Not very effective on kochia, just too many branches. Does seem to have some plausibility with some pigweeds. Harvest weed seed control, I just put questions there. We can grind up kochia seed if we get it to that hammer mill. But if you've got a plant like this, getting it fed through the combine into the hammer mill is the biggest issue, or if you have plants that just run away from you as you're running the combine through the field. All that to say, just a couple more slides here. If I want to judge the effectiveness of my extension program, here's a news clip out of Fargo from last fall.
Soybean farmers out in the fields this week and are fighting a tough weed, they say, during this 2023 harvest. Some farmers say the weed Kochia has been bad this year and believe it's going to get worse in the future.
So either I'm not reaching the general public or she knows something that we don't. But, again, want to make sure everyone's awake. I find inspiration in the weirdest of places. You can grow a Kochia pet. When the winters get long, this was my project last year, put some kochia seed on a chia pet, and sure enough, it grew, got about not even an inch tall, and started flowering. So, said the War Against Kochia. If you're interested in podcasts, have some windshield time. War Against Weeds podcast is one that I'm part of. We do have an episode where we have Dr. Geddes on and Dr. Jenks to talk about Group 14 resistance in kochia. We've had several of my Canadian colleagues on for various reasons. Probably 8 seasons now of episodes, about 30 to 45-minute discussions. Certainly feel free to browse through topics and find one you might be interested in. I say there's an episode for everyone, but not every episode is for everyone. So it just kind of depends on the topic and what you're interested in. And there's just the end there, contact slide. Like I said, if you're interested in what we have in the North Dakota Weed Control Guide, that QR code will bring you there. All trade names and everything in there is applicable for the U.S. is my biggest caveat, but there is some good information about other things in there.